Thomas sat in the Forrester living room, hands trembling as he held his phone, unable to believe what had just happened. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, his eyes darting around as if he was attempting to put together parts of a nightmare that had unexpectedly become reality. Hope entered the room cautiously, sensing instability emanating from him. She'd known Thomas long enough to understand when he was hiding something, and the look in his eyes was one of fear, panic, and devastation. She took a step closer, her voice firm but tinged with concern as she inquired as to what was wrong. At first, Thomas struggled to compose the words. His lips parted but no sound came out. He raked his fingers through his hair while pacing back and forth, his entire body language screaming that something terrible had happened. Hope placed a hand on his arm to stabilize him, encouraging him to look at her and tell her the truth. That's then the words came out, rough and shaken. Paris had stolen Douglas. She snatched their son and fled without leaving a trace. Hope felt the floor give way beneath her. Douglas was more than just Thomas's son. He was her heart and universe. She had raised him, comforted him, and supported him through every storm. The thought of someone taking him away cut into her like a dagger. Her knees buckled and she sank onto the couch, attempting to process what Thomas had just spoken. He swiftly hurried to her side, his voice breaking as he described what had occurred. According to Thomas, Paris had been acting abnormally in recent weeks, her bond to Douglas getting deeper with each passing day. At first, he assumed it was harmless. After all, Paris had always loved children and Douglas adored her. But he watched how her gaze lingered on the youngster, how she made remarks about family and belonging, and how Douglas deserved a different kind of love than what he was receiving. He disregarded it as her showing affection, but now he realizes it was far deeper. Thomas had gone into full panic mode that morning when Douglas failed to arrive at school, and no one could reach Paris. He explored every possible location and called everyone he knew, but Paris and Douglas were gone. Hope's tears flowed as she held her chest and shook her head in amazement. She couldn't understand why Paris, someone they trusted and who had always been kind, would do something so awful. The betrayal slashed deep. Her mind raced over all of the hazards her tiny boy may be in at the moment. Was he safe? Was he afraid? Was Paris attempting to manipulate him, filling his mind with lies? The notion of Douglas crying out for her and calling for his parents while being held captive by a stranger broke her heart. Thomas felt the same anguish. He blamed himself completely. He should have recognized the indications and responded when his senses warned him something was wrong. He had promised Douglas a safe, stable existence, but now his kid was in the care of someone unstable, who had plainly crossed a dangerous line. Hope tried to comfort him, but her own pain was too much. She continued repeating Douglas' name and praying that he would be returned home soon. The following hours were a frenzy of phone calls, police intervention, and desperate searches. Thomas and Hope met with detectives, providing whatever detail they could about Paris, including her friends, family, and probable hiding locations. The officers promised them that an Amber Alert was being issued, and that every resource would be used to locate her. But for Hope and Thomas, time felt like an enemy. Every second passed, Douglas was gone. Hope could not sit motionless. She roamed the house, her voice raspy from yelling Douglas' name while knowing he wasn't present. She clutched his toys and clothes, absorbing the faint aroma of him that persisted in his stuff. She reflected about her final words to him, whether he realized how much she loved him, and whether he was holding out hope that they were looking for him. Meanwhile, Thomas descended into a state of guilt. He went over every conversation he'd had with Paris, recognizing how she'd been planting seeds, crafting a story in which she thought Douglas was hers to steal. The remainder of the Forrester family quickly assembled, shocked at the abduction. Ridge's rage erupted, and his protective instincts flared as he promised they'd find Douglas no matter what. Brooke cradled Hope in her arms, grieving alongside her daughter, attempting to offer support as her own heart broke. Steffi was outraged, demanding answers and asking Thomas how he had allowed Paris to get so close to Douglas in the first place. Thomas could barely defend himself. He knew she was correct. He'd failed in the most important way. Meanwhile, Douglas' world was turned upside down. He sat quietly in the back seat of Paris' car, clutching his backpack, a confused expression on his youthful face. Paris smiled reassuringly at him, telling him they were going on an adventure, and that she was taking him to a new home where everything would be okay. But Douglas was unconvinced. He inquired where his father was, where Hope was, and why they hadn't gone with them. Paris' comments were ambiguous and evasive, but she concealed her despair with false kindness. Douglas felt something was wrong. He had grown up with falsehoods and deception, so he knew when words didn't fit reality. Fear gnawed at him, but he attempted to remain brave, telling himself that his father and Hope would find him. Back at the Forrester estate, Hope finally broke down, sobbing violently in Thomas's arms. She accused herself of failing Douglas, of not safeguarding him properly. Thomas tried to calm her, saying that none of this was her fault and that they would bring him home. But his voice cracked with doubt. He was troubled by the prospect of Paris disappearing permanently, and Douglas being lost to them in ways they couldn't bear to consider. Days passed, each one heavier than the previous. The police followed leads, watching Paris' credit card use and finding her car using traffic cameras, but she always seemed to be one step ahead. Hope became restless, unable to sleep or eat, preoccupied by images of Douglas' face, his innocent eyes yearning for her. Thomas, too, was disintegrating, his fixation with locating his son morphing into an unending pursuit. He scoured old connections, phoned friends he hadn't spoken to in years, and asked anyone who could tell him where Paris had gone. Hope faced Thomas with direct honesty one night, fatigued yet unwilling to quit. She told him that if Douglas was not discovered, she did not know how she would continue. Her entire being was attached to that boy, and the prospect of losing him forever was heartbreaking. Thomas fell down in front of her, revealing that Douglas was also his everything, that he couldn't fathom living without his son's laughter, curiosity, and cuddles. They clung to each other, their common pain connecting them in ways that nothing else could. Paris, on the other hand, was disintegrating in her own unique way. She loved Douglas, or thought she did, but her definition of love was skewed. She convinced herself that she was saving him, that Thomas and Hope did not deserve him, and that she could provide him with a better life. However, the strain of hiding, the fear of being discovered, and Douglas' repeated appeals to return home began to weigh on her. She lashed out at times, but then swiftly tried to calm him down by apologizing and assuring that things would improve. But Douglas saw through it. He wanted his family, and despite what Paris said, he refused to give up hope. The breakthrough came after authorities tracked Paris' automobile across state borders. An astute cop noticed her vehicle parked at a modest motel. A tense struggle ensued, with Paris first unwilling to hand over Douglas, hugging him tightly as if he were her lifeblood. Douglas wailed out for his father, for Hope, and this was what eventually broke Paris' willpower. The officers moved in and securely took Douglas into custody, while Paris was apprehended. When Thomas and Hope received the call, they were overcome with relief and collapsed. They ran to the station where Douglas had been brought, sobbing uncontrollably as they embraced him. Douglas sobbed in their arms, telling them how much he missed them and how afraid he was, but he knew they would find him. Hope lavished him with kisses, whispering again that he was safe now, and that she would never let him leave her sight again. Thomas held them both, gratitude and sorrow rushing over him at once. The ordeal left behind scars. Douglas' trust was shattered by the betrayal of someone he thought was a friend. Hope and Thomas wrestled with remorse over what had happened, knowing they had allowed someone get too close. The family banded together, determined to protect Douglas and help him recuperate. But the memory of those awful days stayed like a shadow, a warning of how easily everything valuable may be taken away. In the end, Thomas and Hope found themselves transformed. Their bond was stronger, forged in fire and anguish, and held together by their passionate love for their kid. They promised never to let down their guard again, never to let anyone hurt Douglas. The nightmare of Paris' treachery would never go away, but the brightness of Douglas' grin, the sound of his laughing, and the feel of his arms around them were enough to remind them of what was truly important: family, love, and the unbreakable tie between father and child. Thomas sat firmly on the edge of the sofa, his jaw clenched so hard it felt like it might snap. His palms shook against his knees, his mind running faster than his body could cope. In the last hour, he had gone through 1,000 scenarios, each of which concluded with the same horrible reality. His son was no longer alive. The door opened and Hope entered the Forrester living room. She froze when she noticed Thomas's condition. His hair was untidy, his breathing was shallow, and his entire body shook as if he had just raced miles in a storm. "Thomas," Hope muttered, her eyes pinched. "What happened?" He gazed up at her, his eyes watery and his throat tight. He was speechless for a moment. He opened and closed his mouth several times before eventually letting out the words that had been suffocating him. "Paris took Douglas," he explained, his voice cracking. "She is gone. She took him." Hope's face had lost all color. For a brief moment the words didn't make sense. They hung in the air, incomprehensible, like a terrible trick of her imagination. Then they fell, heavy and suffocating, and her knees buckled. "No." She staggered to the couch. "No, Thomas. No." "She did," Thomas muttered hoarsely, running both hands through his hair. "I looked everywhere. His school did not see him this morning. Paris did not answer her phone. Her apartment is empty. She's gone, Hope. She stole him." Hope shook her head furiously, as if rejecting reality altogether. She'd been around him for weeks, but I thought she was sweet to him. She laughed with him. He trusted her. We trusted her. Her fists grabbed the couch's edge until her knuckles grew white. "Why is she doing this?" Thomas started pacing, his steps unsteady and his voice faltering with each word. "I saw it, and I didn't stop it. She moved too close. She argued that Douglas deserved more and needed someone to provide him with a better life. I thought that was simply her being affectionate. I was stupid." He smashed his fist into the mantel. "God, I should have stopped this." Hope's tears were flowing freely now. She grasped her chest and gasped, as if the air had turned razor-sharp. Her mind conjured up pictures she couldn't bear. Douglas crying in the back of a car, Douglas calling for her but not hearing her voice. Her whole body shook as she said, "My baby. My little boy." Thomas went to his knees in front of her, desperately clutching her hands. "We will find him. I pledge to you, Hope, that I will bring him back. I'll tear the world apart if I have to." Her huge, tear-filled eyes met his. "He is afraid, Thomas. I can feel it. He's outside right now, wondering where we are." Ridge entered, followed by Brooke. Their expressions altered instantaneously as they observed Hope's tears and Thomas's agitated mood. "What is going on?" Ridge demanded, his voice harsh and foreboding calamity. Despite the fact that his body felt like it was crumbling, Thomas forced himself to rise. "Paris took Douglas. She's gone." The room became silent as Ridge's rage surged. "She what?" He lunged forward, his hands balled into fists. "How could you allow this to happen, Thomas? How the hell could you allow someone to come near your son like that?" Thomas flinched but did not argue. His father's rage was understandable. I believe she cared about him. I assumed she was secure. Brooke rushed to Hope's side, throwing her arms around her daughter. "Oh, sweetheart," she cried as she clutched Hope tight. "We will find him. We will get him back. He'll be fine." Hope hid her face against her mother's shoulder, sobbing quietly. "She stole him from me, Mom. She took my baby," Ridge said, pulling out his phone. "We are calling the cops. Right now." Douglas sat on the side of a bed in a quiet motel room away from the city. His bag was still on his shoulders, and his little hands clung to the straps as if they could keep him safe. His large blue eyes flew to Paris, who was pacing the room and muttering to herself. "Where is Dad?" Douglas asked softly. "And Hope? Why didn't they join us?" Paris hesitated and forced a smile. She knelt in front of him, her voice honeyed yet strained. "Sweetheart, they do not understand. They do not know what is best for you. But I do. I am going to provide you a better life. You'll see." Douglas frowned. "But I want my father. I want Hope." Paris' smile faltered. She stroked back his hair, her hand quivering slightly. "They'll thank me someday. You will thank me. You'll see how much happier you can be with me." Douglas' heart raced. He was old enough to notice something wasn't right. He grabbed his rucksack harder, thinking to himself, "Dad will arrive. Hope will arrive. They'll find me." Back at the Forrester estate, the house had become the command center. Police officers filled the room, asking questions and documenting every detail. When was the last time you visited Paris? One detective inquired. Yesterday, Thomas responded instantly. She picked up Douglas in the park. I was right there, but she stated she wanted to get him ice cream. He begged, so I let him accompany her. They returned 15 minutes later, and I didn't think much of it. Hope hid her face in her hands. She seemed normal. She planned it. Even then, she intended to take him. The detective nodded grimly. We will issue an Amber Alert. Every cop in the city will be searching for her vehicle. Do you know whether she has family living out of state? Are there any friends that could assist her hide? Thomas searched his thoughts, hating himself for not paying more attention to Paris' personal life. She has a sister named Zoe, but she is in another nation. Beyond that, I'm not sure. Hope's voice shook as she murmured, she may be bringing him anywhere. Anywhere in the world. Brooke stroked her daughter's hair, uttering assurances she couldn't believe. Ridge, meanwhile, banged his fist against the table. We can't just sit around waiting. I will go out there personally. I'll search every street if I have to. The hours felt like they lasted forever. Hope couldn't eat or sleep. She rocked back and forth with Douglas's favorite toy vehicle in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She relived every moment she'd had with him. Bedtime stories, his laughter ringing through the corridors, the way he'd run into her arms after school. She repeated his name like a prayer. Thomas sat nearby, looking at nothing. Guilt was eating him alive. This is my fault, he mumbled. I allowed her inside. I let her approach him. I should have known. Hope lifted her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Do not blame yourself alone. I also trusted her. We both allowed this to happen. Her voice crackled. But we'll get him back. We have to. Thomas's voice cracked. If we don't, I don't know how I'll live with myself. Hope grabbed his hand hard. Then we won't stop until we do. Meanwhile, Paris was starting to crumble. She had convinced herself that she was saving Douglas, but his continual questioning and silent sobs were wearing on her. When he called for his father again, she snapped at him once before softening and pulling him into an unwelcome hug. You'll see, baby, she said. One day, you'll understand I did this because I love you. But Paris knew the net was closing in. The television broadcasted information on the Amber Alert. When she paid with cash at the gas station, the clerks glanced at her with suspicion. Every sound outside the motel window caused her to jump. Douglas, small but wise beyond his years, saw her worry. He held on to optimism like a lifeline. He said quietly to himself, Dad is looking for me. Hope is searching for me. They will come. 2 days later, the call arrived. An officer's voice rang over Thomas's phone. We've found them. Paris' automobile was observed at a motel. Your son is safe. Thomas's legs buckled, and his breath caught in his throat. Hope, noting his look, placed her palms over her mouth. Douglas. She gasped. He's safe, Thomas murmured, tears finally falling. They got him. He's safe. Hope let out a loud, guttural scream of relief, releasing every ounce of anxiety that had been smothering her. She collapsed into Thomas's arms, sobbing with excitement. When they finally saw Douglas at the police station, nothing else mattered. Hope ran to him first, diving on her knees and grabbing him in her arms. Oh, my baby, my sweet boy, she exclaimed, stroking his face, his hair and every inch of him. I've missed you so much. I'll never let you go again. Douglas clutched to her, his small arms around her neck. I missed you too, Mommy Hope. I knew you'd find me. Thomas crouched alongside them, his voice breaking as he drew Douglas into his embrace. I'm really sorry, buddy. I should have protected you. But you're safe now. Douglas hugged both of them, tears running down his little cheeks. I adore you, Dad. I love you, Hope. At that moment, the world came to a halt. The anguish, anxiety, and shame all disappeared in comparison to the immense relief of holding their kid again. Even after Paris was caught and charged, the aftermath of the incident persisted. Hope awoke in the middle of the night, hurrying to Douglas' room to ensure he was still there. Thomas battled with the gnawing shame of allowing Paris to get too near. Douglas, despite his resilience, bore wounds from terror that could only be healed with time and love. Yet through it all, one reality grew clearer than ever. Nothing could break their bond. No lies, no betrayal. Not even the most horrific nightmare. They'd found their way back to one another, and that was what really mattered.